Welcome to Pillars of Leadership podcast. Today we have Lieutenant Colonel Oakland McCulloch. Welcome.
Hey, well, thanks, Doug. I appreciate it.
Great. I'm looking forward to this. Your bio, people are in for a treat today. We're going to be talking about leadership. We're going to be talking about legacy. Going to be talking about some of your personal stories and advice. You're a decorated 23-year career in the Army with numerous leadership positions in the Infantry and Armor branches, Combat Arms Office, Armored Cavalry Officer, Desert Storm deployment, Saudi and Iraq, 31 military service awards, including the Bronze Star award for ground combat acts of heroism. So we thank you for your service, sir.
Yeah, well, thank you. I always tell people when they thank me, it was an honor to serve the people of the country. It really was.
Well, I appreciate that. It's an honor to know you, and you've got a storied background here. Attended West Point, the degrees in history and military arts and science and history, and now you're in beautiful Daytona Beach with 2 children and 3 grandchildren.
Yeah, I always tell people the only thing better than being a dad is being a grandfather.
And in Daytona Beach.
And in Daytona Beach, yeah.
That's a bonus. So your new book, relatively new, a couple of years now, I guess, your leadership legacy, becoming the leader you were meant to be, and you've been on 169 podcasts.
Yeah.
That's amazing. You're still smiling and enjoying this, I guess.
I am. I look at getting I got 4 ways really to get my message out, and that this really is my passion at this point, to talk about leadership to as many people as I can. And so I've got my keynote talk, I've got my book, I've got social media, and then I've got podcasts. And I try to be on as many podcasts as people want me to be on. I think I've only turned one person down in all the time.
Well, I encourage people, and we'll talk about your book later on, but encourage them to get this. What I loved about, and I met you in a leadership conference call with executives across the country, and you did a presentation on leadership, and I loved when you made the statement and you said, "There's really no academia or leadership theories or leadership discussions from books in my book. It's really
Yeah.
all about practices, your experiences, and your life as a leader, right?"
That's right. Theory and all that's important, and I've certainly learned theory over the years and courses I've taken through the Army and college. But we can teach you all the theory in the world. That doesn't make you a leader. The
Right.
only thing that makes you a leader is go out there and do it. And so I'm a firm believer in let's talk about the things that leaders have to do to be good leaders, and then use some examples of how it works, how it didn't work, whatever.
Yeah, so there's kind of I just got my PhD in leadership studies, and so there can be a stigma along with that as people look at you as, well, he's just one of those academic types with no experience in leadership. So it's great to have. I'll throw in some academic as necessary and required here, and then we'll talk about your book. And let's start with that. How would you define legacy? This book is about leadership legacy. How would you define that?
Yeah, for me, legacy has two parts. It's a very small part in what you accomplished in the organization that you were leading. Now, that does matter because in the real world, results do matter. Maybe in fantasy land they don't, but in real world they do. So a small part of that's about what you accomplish. And the reason I say that is because as the leader of that organization, when you leave, the new leader's coming in and they're going to change things, and now it becomes their organization. So where did your legacy go if that's the only thing you're counting on as your legacy? The largest part of your legacy, in my opinion, is the next generation of leaders that you help develop. And I had a gentleman who worked for me, Master Sergeant David Powell. I say he worked for me. He was probably a better leader than I was. And one day we were talking about the significance of what we were doing when I was running my Army ROTC program at the University of South Alabama. And he said, you know, we were commissioning lieutenants, so officers for and leaders for the United States Army and for the country. And he looked over at me and he said, "Sir, you know, great leadership handed down from generation to generation is what develops great nations." And I thought, wow, what a powerful quote.
Mm,
And the most powerful part of that quote is that you can take that word nation, and you can substitute anything you want for it. Family, business, hospital, food bank, university, doesn't matter, because every organization needs good leadership. And that's your real legacy, is that next
mm,
generation of leaders that you help produce, who then produces the next generation of leaders. And all those things that you passed on to that generation that you taught, they're going to pass on plus more, but certainly probably some of the things that you taught them to that next generation. And that's your legacy.
that's great. Yeah. You're really leaving a legacy, whether you realize it or not. And so, some people hear that word
You are.
legacy and there's a negative connotation with that. There's a dark side of legacy too. People look at, well, I wasn't raised well, or I did have issues with my parent or this boss. And from a
Right.
leadership perspective, though, you can learn from those negative experiences and just vow to never do that. And so there can, same thing with parenting, right? So when you're
That's
leaving a
right.
legacy, we'll talk about some of the different spheres. During my PhD, I asked the question during my interviews and said, what does legacy mean to you? And so I'll share that with you. Because I think it's much better than what I could have come up with. Concept of transmitting or passing something along, being remembered, starting something that people want to get on board. They want to jump in with you. Long lasting, part of something bigger. I love this one. The mark that you leave, how
Yeah.
people will remember you. Um, what remains from someone when they're gone. And then you talked about it here. Is this something you leave behind for the next generation? Thinking multi-generationally, right? Instead of just the next paycheck, next quarter, next problematic meeting that you might have. Legacy you want to leave for children, grandchildren, what you're remembered for, the residue that's left behind. I like that one as well. So
Yeah.
um, there's really a lot of areas in this concept of legacy. Erik Erikson wrote about generativity and that. And when I interviewed people, I found out that those in their 20s and 30s didn't think as much about it as those in their midlife and beyond. Where did your
Right.
passion for leadership legacy come from? And is it relatively new?
No, it isn't. I guess I was lucky. I had some really good mentors as a young officer. And even in high school, I had a couple of really good mentors who I have kept in touch with over the years. My high school basketball coach, my high school history teacher, and who were really good mentors of mine. And so they kind of passed on that, you know, it's not about you. It's about things beyond you and bigger than you,
Mhm.
and that you really do need to start figuring out what your legacy is going to be and start working toward that. And so I think I really kind of understood that probably about my company command time when I was a captain in the Army. I really started figuring out that it really was about helping to produce that next generation. You know, and I still have people that that were in my company that stay in contact with me. I just got a phone call right after I published my book. I got a phone call from a gentleman um, who I'm going to do a speaking engagement for probably in May. Um, and he was a private in my basic training company. And one day I was out. I always tried to be out wherever the privates were doing whatever they were doing, and we were out on the range, the M1 tank range, and it was lunchtime. Well, there were four privates sitting on top of this tank. So I grabbed an MRE and I climbed up there and I started talking to them about what do you want to do after the Army? Or if, you want to make a career out of it, you want to get out, if you're going to get out, what do you want to do? And I was talking about the possibilities of becoming an officer, going through Army ROTC and all those kinds of things. And, he graduated from my company from basic training, went off into the Army. He did his time in the Army. He got out, he went back to college, got his degree, got commissioned in the Army, did a career in the Army, 20 years in the Army as an officer, got out, started a business. When I wrote my book, he saw it and he gave me a call and he said, "You probably don't remember me." He said, "But you had lunch with us up on top of a tank." I said, "Well, you're right. I don't remember your name, didn't remember your name, but I certainly remember that day." But that's the kinds of things that you start to develop that legacy where people remember you. You had an influence on their life that goes way back and maybe changed their life. I've actually had people who have told me that things that I did for them and with them and during my time as a leader, that it changed their life, that it changed the trajectory of their life, and they did something that they thought they probably never even thought about doing.
Isn't that rewarding as a leader just to get a glimpse of that? Same thing with being a teacher is oftentimes
It
you
is.
don't get the glimpse. You don't even get to see the impact, the iceberg underneath, that really you've helped create those seeds that have been planted. I think someone asked me, what's the most rewarding thing as a leader you've experienced? And I had to think long and hard about that. But I went back to 3 or 4 leaders that I had invested in and it worked for me. All 3 of them were smarter than me, no doubt. And but all 3 of them, actually it was 4, were promoted, and seeing that was rewarding. Seeing them
Yeah.
promoted and advancing beyond where I was in my career is rewarding. And sometimes that can take decades to
Oh,
see.
absolutely. I'll give you a story. I was up at not this last December, but the December before last, when I was still working my day job before I retired. And I was in Savannah, Georgia at a conference that I had to go to. Well, one of a young lady, I say a young lady, 20 years younger than me at least. She was stationed at Fort Stewart, Georgia, right outside Savannah. And she found out I was coming that way, and she said, "Well, we got to have lunch." And so we did. I stopped in Savannah and we had lunch there. I stopped at Fort Stewart and we had lunch there. And she said, we were talking and catching up, and she said, "Oh, and by the way, I just came out on the lieutenant colonel's list." You think that made me feel a little bit old? I was a lieutenant colonel when I commissioned her from my program. And I said, "Well, that's fantastic." I said, "So what do you want to do now that what's the next job you want to do as a lieutenant colonel?" And she said, "I only have one thing left that I want to do in the Army." She said, "I want to go back to the University of South Alabama and be the professor of military science there like you were. And I want to run that program just like you did." Talking about make you feel good. And those are the things that make you understand that you are doing some good things and the importance of what you're doing.
Yeah. Was there a point in your career where it just kind of hit you that, hey, I am a leader, and it became a responsibility, or with that knowledge, you knew that, hey, I am leaving a legacy. This is a multi-generational thing, or was it more of a progressive throughout your career?
Yeah, well, I think certainly it got, it grew, but I think I really did start figuring it out probably my around the 4-year mark in the Army, when because I started to see some of the influence that I had and the difference that I was making in people's lives. And but certainly, the higher up you got, the more people you got to influence, and the longer period you got to see a couple things and hear a couple stories from people about how you made a difference. And so certainly, I certainly saw it early on, but I saw more of it and saw the impact more as I got further along in my career.
Okay. Yeah, the research shows 2/3 made, 1/3 born. You'll always hear that question, is a leader born or made? And there actually is research that shows that yes, leaders can be made, and that makes up the predominant amount of the percentage. But there's also characteristics within leaders, and some leaders more so than others, whether it's charisma or inspiration or servant leadership, those type of things that are genetic, and care, love, concern. Some of those things come easier than for some than others. But
Yeah,
what would you
I
say?
absolutely agree with that, that they're,
Yeah.
because I get asked that all the time. Are leaders made or are they born? I said, the majority of leaders are made. And we, we do a good job of doing that. At least we used to. I think we still probably do a pretty good job of it. But I also say there are some born. And I said, if you don't believe me, go out on a playground where there's a bunch of 5-year-olds playing. There's somebody in charge. The kids are following another kid. I
Yeah.
promise you, every playground, there's one person out there that all the kids are following. Nobody taught that young man or that young woman how to be a leader, but people are following them.
Even in the nursery, at when they're crawling around and you see toxic leadership practice for somebody grabbing one of those pacifiers out of another kid's mouth. So
Yeah,
yeah, it starts early for sure.
it does.
So did you have one thing that was ingrained in you as a leader, and maybe one thing that was developed? If you kind of look at in retrospect, is there
Yeah.
one thing that was inbuilt more so, and then something you had to develop over time or that you learn more?
Yeah, I think developed and learn more is communication skills.
Mm.
You know, I I don't know that I was always a great communicator, and I'm not sure I am a great communicator now, but I'm much better than I was uh, when I first started being a leader, and certainly in the listening part. That's the part that really I had to develop, and I think most people do, but
Mhm.
certainly I think a lot of leaders don't do a good job of listening. And so that was one I really worked hard on. And again, the reason I did was because a good leader that I got to serve under kind of taught me that lesson, that you need to listen well and really listen, not just listen so that you can answer something, but you to learn what that person is actually talking about and care about what they're talking about. And I had a great servant leader who taught me that when I was a captain. So that certainly helped me along the way. I think the one thing that was kind of ingrained in me and always has been is that I want to win. You know, I don't care if I'm playing old maid with my 10-year-old granddaughter. I want to win. Okay.
Yeah.
I've always been that way. I've always been very competitive. I was captain of my sports teams, baseball, basketball, football, through high school and beyond. And I always wanted to be the best at whatever I could be. And my father I think I had that, but I think my father certainly ingrained that even more in me. And he had this, when I was growing up, he had this thing called the 75% rule. And he said, son, if you can't do something better than 75% of the people doing it, then you need to do one of two things. You either need to figure out how to get better at it, or you need to go do something else, because obviously it doesn't matter to you. And so I kind of lived by that all my life. And it just got stronger and stronger and stronger. But that's probably something I've had for as long as I can remember.
Yeah, no, that's good. Is there something from you talk a lot in your book and in your speaking engagements about the leaders that have both that have worked for you and that you have worked for that have been successful and you've learned from. What about from a poor leader? You get those along the way. You're going, how in the world did they get into that spot, right?
Oh, I've had
Where
those
did they
leaders. Yeah.
shine, right?
Yeah.
And
I think in my career, I think I had 3 leaders out of 23 years. I had 3 leaders that I would say, that I learned a lot from, what not to do. And you can learn just as much from a bad leader as you can from a good leader. I mean, absolutely. I don't know how many times I've been standing in formation and one of those bad leaders would do something, and the hair on the back of your neck stands up and you're like, yeah, I'm never doing that. And so I've had a few of those, ones that didn't set the example or didn't treat people, right. Didn't care about people. And I had one who absolutely did not care about people. I mean, it was obvious. How he made full bird colonel is beyond my imagination,
Mhm.
but he did. And, you know, I learned a lot about what not to do from my year and couple months with him.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I think I learned most from those leaders I didn't want to follow or didn't want to be like was that is how they treated people. And
Absolutely.
when you talk about legacy, and Erikson wrote about this too. He talked about generativity. You're investing in generating something else, building it up, and trying to make it flourish. And when you do that, that word generativity often means care.
Yes.
And so that's probably one of the hardest things to learn as a leader because that's, in some people it's in you and some it's not, right? I'm
Yeah.
just going to focus on the results, the end results, my goal, the challenges, but you took time to learn that. And one of the hardest things to do as a leader is to terminate people. And I've had to go through that, and I've cried through that with people. And it wasn't manufactured. It was just my mom was a softie, and so I turn out to be kind of a softie. And that's a pro and a con, right? Sometimes
Yeah.
I cry when I wish I wouldn't cry.
Yeah.
And but you did something. You tell us about the story when you went through those few terminations and how you treated those people during and after.
Well, I think in my book, and my wife has reminded me of this. I didn't do a good job of kind of leading up how all those things happened. You know, I'm a firm believer that you have to hold people to a standard. Now, as a lead, here's the difference between a boss and a leader. A boss walks up to you and says, "You're not meeting the standard, fix it." Well, if you knew how to fix it, you'd probably be making meeting the standard. So you're setting them up for failure at that point. A good leader will say, okay, you're not meeting the standard. Here's the standard. Here's where you are. These are the things we are going to do to help make you meet the standard.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in the lead up to those, to two of those, I did that. One of them, I had a guy who worked for me who was just had no business being in the position he was in. He was borrowing money from subordinates. He was, had a DUI. He had debt all over town. Assaulted his wife. I mean, all those things. And so I made the decision that I was going to try to put him out of the Army. And even though my boss above me didn't agree with me,
Mm.
and long process, and I actually was successful in getting him out of the Army, and not because I didn't like him. I didn't.
Right.
That wasn't the thing. You know, the organization was better. The Army was better without him in it because he just wasn't. He didn't belong in the positions that he was now in and going to be in the future. So that was one. And then I had somebody who just didn't take care of the people in the organization, and I made it very clear from the very beginning that that was what we were going to do. And if you didn't do that, you weren't going to work for me. And this gentleman didn't take care of people. And so, even after a couple of times of telling him, and then finally I saw him to do something that was I just couldn't put up accept anymore. And I just said, okay, you're done. And those aren't easy. I mean,
Mm-mm.
even when they need to be done, they're not easy. But again, if you don't hold people to standards, then you're not going to be very successful. And it goes back, you're talking about the leaders who only look at standards. I'm not one of those. I mean, at results, I do believe you got to get results,
Mhm.
but I think the mistake that a lot of leaders make is that they only worry about the results and they don't worry about how you're going to get those results. I think good leaders, servant leaders, understand that if you make the people in your organization better, then they're going to make the organization better and you're going to get the results you want. But you get them for the right reasons. You get those results
Yeah.
because you took care of people, not because you were a bully or because you were selfish or because you wanted the next promotion. So it wasn't about you. It was about making the people in your organization better so that they can make your organization better. And that's the difference, I think, between what we were talking about, a servant leader and somebody who just is just worried about themselves and their next promotion or their next pay
Right.
raise.
Yeah, it was when I read that, I was intrigued by, because I think people will put you and generalize and say, well, I can see a lieutenant colonel firing someone or terminating them very easy. But just because of that, the mindset of you guys are tough, right? You are results focused. You're protecting our country. You've got a job to do. But what you did, if I remember reading correctly, is you sent a note, a handwritten note to one of the people you had
I didn't
terminated.
send it to them. I put it on their desk with them sitting right there so they could read why I was terminating them.
Okay. But with
Yeah,
that came an element of care, right? You took the time to do that. You didn't, I've been terminated in the past where it was just
get
get
out.
a laptop.
Yeah. No, on all three of them that I did, I had a handwritten note. I wrote out why I was doing it. Because I wanted them to understand why I was doing it. Because just because I terminated him, besides the one guy, I'm just not sure he was a good person. The other two, they weren't bad people. They
Right.
just weren't meeting the standard that I was holding them to and weren't going to meet it. They made that pretty clear. And so, but I want them to get better so that when they go to their next job, that they can figure out that there's something wrong. They got to fix it if they want to stay in the next job. Because in the end, the goal is not to, I, and the thing I told two of them was, don't let this define you. Go out there, find another job and
Mhm.
do a good job and be productive, be a good team member, do the things that you need to do. And I've told several other people that I had to kick out of my ROTC program because did like one young lady used marijuana, didn't have a choice.
Yeah.
At that point, the Army was, you come up hot on the test, you're out. And I told her, I said, don't let this define you. I said, just because you can't be an Army officer now doesn't mean you can't go out there and be successful at something else. Because in the end, that's what leadership is about, is helping to make people better. I mean, I believe that 100%.
Right. And it becomes very self-focused instead of follower focused. If all you're thinking about is your results and is this person helping me get to my objectives and my needs. And James McGregor Burns wrote about this quite a bit, and he talked about servant leadership as having shared motives, shared values, and shared goals. So they're not just the leader's goals, otherwise you don't have the buy-in. Robert
That's
Greenleaf
right.
said, serving the best interests of the followers. Well, you're showing care and concern for what their next future, what their career is after they leave the Army, and they'll remember that. They're probably ticked off at you for the next few months, but they'll remember that. And
Yeah.
one of the best tests of a servant leader is, are the followers growing? Are they becoming, I think Burns says, healthier, wiser, freer, more autonomous? Are they more likely to be a servant leader themselves? And there are so many
Yeah.
different, and I'll try and put up some of the words here, but I'd like you to talk about servant leadership too. But these are some of the words coming from followers they looked at an exemplary leader as one who cares, one who helps, one who empowers, one who develops, one who defends, one who motivates. You talked about listening and understanding, empathizing, putting yourself in their shoes, one who's honest, trustworthy, respectful, appreciative, and authentic. What in your career has worked being a servant leader? What is the most important thing?
Yeah, so I've been lucky in my last 15 years of working with the Army, my 3 years running our ROTC program, and the last 12 doing recruiting for Army ROTC as a Department Army civilian. I've had my hand in commissioning over 580 lieutenants. And I told every single one of them as often as I could. But on the day they got commissioned, I would walk up to every single one of them and I'd say, look, celebrate today because today is all about you. Okay, you get to do something that very few people get to do. You get to become an officer in the United States Army. Celebrate. Remember this, that now that we've pinned those bars on your shoulder, tomorrow morning when you wake up, it will never be about you again. It's about the people that you have the privilege to lead, the organization you have the privilege to lead. It's about the Army, the mission, the country. Then if we have time, we might talk about you maybe. Because it really is, the term I always, or the phrase I always use is it's not about you and it's all about you. It's not about the title you get or the privileges you get, or that you get better pay, you get to live in a nicer house, get to drive a nicer car. Let's face it, leaders get those things, and that's okay. As long as that's not the only reason you want to be the leader. If that is the only reason you want to be a leader, please go do something else because you're not going to be a good one. It's all about you and how you empower the people that you have the privilege to lead to better themselves, who will then better your organization. You're not going to better your organization as a leader. Sorry. Don't want to pop anybody's bubble there, but you as the leader aren't going to make that organization better. The people in your organization are going to make it better. And the only way they're going to do that is if you empower them to do it.
Yeah, I mean, a real leader is one who not just leads followers, but you lead leaders. And so that's what leadership legacy, you have the same passion. We want to raise up the next generation of leaders. Now, we're all followers. 85% of our time, even in your role, you were a follower.
We all got a boss.
Yeah.
Everybody has a boss. Mine's right next door.
Right, in Daytona Beach, right, yeah. So you've got to be a good follower, and there's a whole one thing I'm excited about is this growth. There's thousands of leadership books, but there's this new cottage industry about followership, becoming a good follower, because you have bad leaders and you have bad followers. And so how can you be a better follower is part of being a good leader too. And
absolutely.
So
one of the things I always tell young leaders is, look, you're not going to be the leader all the time. I don't care what there's always somebody over you. When you are in the following position, when you have to follow somebody, keep this in mind. The follower you need to be, the way you need to be as a follower is the same way you want the people that you are leading to follow you. Now, that doesn't mean that you just say yes, whatever. You got to be able to look yourself in the mirror every morning and like who you see. So there's times when you got to stand up and say, yeah, I can't do that. You got to stay true to yourself. But for the most part, most followers, you gotta follow orders. You got to follow the things that the leader wants to do. Doesn't mean that you can't have an input in it. One of the things because as a follower, what I wanted to be able to do was say, hey, boss, that's good, but let's look at this too. We might be able to make it a little bit better if we do this.
right.
And some of the leaders I had loved it and they ran with it. Other ones said, shut up, Lieutenant, go do what I told you to do. Okay.
You tried.
But I tried to never do that to the people that I was leading. I always tried to get their opinion whenever I could. I mean, there's times when you had to make a decision right away. I got it. But for the most part, I had time. I'd say, okay, give me some ideas. And so then some of them were good, some were bad. That's my job as a leader, figure out what the good ideas are and what the bad ideas are, and use the ones I can use. But you know, you are at least asking their opinion, and so you're allowing them, one, to voice their opinion. Number two, to possibly they're thinking through that process so that when they are now a leader, they can do the same thing, and hopefully they will follow suit and use the skills, talents, knowledge of the people that work for them.
Yeah, that's I'm talking to Dr. Barbara Kellerman later this week, and she has written many books on followership, and that's one of the things that's emphasized is being a courageous follower. And that's not an easy thing to go do because
It
that
is
can be,
not.
it's easy if it's an Enron thing, right? If you want to stand up, but you're probably going to be blacklisted or lose your job. But just doing what you said as a leader is allowing your followers the creativity and the just they're willing to come to you with ideas. There's so much power in that, where I've had many leaders where everything you've brought is struck down.
Yeah.
And so because they have it all figured out, there's no shared vision, it's already figured out, you just be a good follower. Well,
Yeah.
as being a good leader means allowing those followers to participate, right?
Yeah. Well, here's the problem. And those leaders that don't listen or don't even ask, much less listen, they let their ego get in the way. And look, we all have an ego. Anybody who tells you they don't have an ego is lying to you.
I
We
want
all
an
have.
ego with some of my employees, right? You
You,
want some.
you want people to have an ego because that's what drives people to be successful. That's what drives them to be the best at whatever they do. But as a good leader, you have to understand when to put that ego aside. Because I don't care how long you've been doing what you do or how good you are at what you do. You don't have all that knowledge. You don't have all the answers. You don't have all the skills. You don't have all the abilities in that subject. And the people who work for you have some of those.
Right.
You as the leader have to understand what your weaknesses are, what you aren't as strong in, and use the strengths of those people who you have the privilege to lead to make that organization better. That's putting your ego aside for the good of the organization. And leaders have a problem with that sometimes. I've worked for leaders who had a problem with
Well,
that.
you told a story. We talked about servant leadership and defending your people or being an advocate. And you told a story about a training situation where you had to tell your boss to back off, having to again stand up to a leader that maybe they're older, more experienced, have a different title on their badge. Can you just tell that story? Do you remember that story?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, so I was selected to be the scout platoon leader, which every infantry armor officer wants to be the scout platoon leader as a lieutenant. And about 3 weeks before I was going to take over that position, the mortar platoon had an accident and killed the platoon leader, killed a couple soldiers. And so next day, boss calls me in the office, says, Oak, I know you were going to be the scout platoon leader. Got a problem with the mortar platoon. We got to fix it. Tag, you're it. Yeah, great. So I said, I'm a good soldier. I do what I'm told. So I went home that night and I came up with a plan. And he said, oh, by the way, in I think 3 months, 6 months, whatever it was, we got a evaluation of that platoon. I said, okay. So I went home and I came up with a plan on how I was going to fix that platoon. Next morning, I walk in and I say, okay, here's the plan. And I'm saying things and he's shaking his head. Yeah, that's good. That's good. I said, and we're going to the field next week and we're going to start firing live ammo again. And he said, no, you can't do that. I said, that's the only reason we have them. If we're not going to fire live, we can't fire live ammo, then let's just disband the platoon and put them somewhere else. And I finally convinced him that we could do it and we'd do it safely. And so Monday morning, we're out there going through drills, no live ammo. I want to make sure these guys can do what they're supposed to do. I don't want to end up like the last platoon leader.
Yeah.
We're going to make sure that they got it right before we put any live ammo in that tube. And so we're going through dry fire exercises. They're just going through the motions, no real ammo. And all of a sudden they stop. And I was what's going on? And I noticed that when I was looking at them, I noticed they weren't looking at me, they were looking past me. So I turn around and I look, and there's the Lieutenant Colonel checking up on the lieutenant. And I said, okay, I got that. He's checking up on the new lieutenant, making sure things are going okay. Same thing in the afternoon after lunch, we're going through dry fire exercises. All of a sudden they stop, and I turn around and there's the Lieutenant Colonel. I told my guys, just take a break, do whatever you need to do. I said, hey, sir, let's take a walk into the woods. And we walked out into the woods a good distance. And I said, okay, sir, this is really simple. Either you are going to fix this mortar platoon or I'm going to fix it. We both can't do it. I don't care which one. You can fire me, you can move me, you can do whatever. But either you trust me, you gave me the position, trust me, or you do it, one or the other. After a whole lot of yelling, none of which was by me, he finally came to understand that I was probably right, and he left me alone. And 3 months, 6 months later, whatever it was, we went through our evaluation and we got a perfect score. So, you know, again, the problem, which leads us to the other problem that lots of leaders have, is micromanaging people, afraid to let go. And I had a boss who retired, a 3-star general, who said, Oak, leadership is on a scale. On this end of the scale, you have that authoritarian, micromanaging, do it exactly as I tell you to do it type of leader. He said, nobody likes to work for that person. We've all worked for that person, and it isn't fun. And on this end of the scale, you have Attila the Hun and chaos, controlled chaos, but chaos. And he said, and you want to be as close, as far down that path toward chaos as you can get. He said, and the way you get there is this: you train people to a standard, so you know that they can do what you're asking them to do. You give them you give them the big picture of what you want it to look like at the end. This is what it has to look like. You give them the resources they need, time, equipment, people, money, whatever it is. You give them the authority to make it happen, and then you get out of their way and you let them do it. And the analogy I always use is, if you got to get to 9, well, 7 plus 2 is 9, but so is 6 plus 3 and 5 plus 4 and 8 plus 1. How do you care how they get to 9 as long as they get to 9? Let them do it however they would do it. Will they do it the same way you did it? Absolutely not. But who cares as long as they get to 9? That's where creativity happens. That's where you're letting them use their skills, their abilities, their knowledge to get things done. And they will absolutely surprise you if you get out of their way and let them do. Now, that doesn't mean you wash your hands of it.
Right.
You're still there to answer questions, to give advice, to give more resources if they need it, whatever, but you let them do it the way they want to do it.
That's really good. And just allowing your followers to be courageous, and that leader, maybe wasn't so much, but you took the time to, because I'm sure there was some wrestling going on in your head. Should I confront him with this? How should I do it? How many times did you rehearse your speech? Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not built in most of us to go to your boss and tell them they're screwing up.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's why I retired a lieutenant colonel.
Well, I appreciate the message. One thing, you know, about this concept of leadership legacy is it's nowhere on the radar of the leadership continuum, if you will. I want to share this with you real quick. So the encouraging thing to me is you're talking about this legacy leadership, and it's really nowhere on here. I did a search, part of my research, to look at these different theories. You just talked about the authoritarian, heroic, and great man theory approach, which, you know, worked for a time. But as you see how different leadership theories have moved towards practice, you will see growth on the bottom of these follower-centric theories. So you talked a lot about transformational leadership, results-oriented, servant leadership coming in the 70s and 80s. And now I think what you're seeing here in the 2000s is this focus on authentic leadership, being transparent, being willing to let your followers come to you, and this whole topic of spiritual leadership and servant leadership and followership. So I'm really encouraged. I want to see legacy leadership on here is you're going beyond this internal intrinsic motivation, is you're looking at a multi-generational non-selfish leadership style, which even goes beyond servant leadership, is you're thinking beyond your family, your dinner table, the people that report to you. You're looking at our society. Napoleon said, we are dealers in hope, right? That's what we want to go do, is to stir up that hope and to give people the tools, like you said, empower them. But before you empower them, give them the tools, educate them, and let them know you're by their side. Let them be willing to fail and take risks, right?
Yeah, absolutely. If you have a zero defect environment as a leader, you stifle all creativity. Why would anybody take a chance if I do it wrong? You know, and there's a difference between making a mistake and making a conscious decision to do something bad.
Right.
I mean, we all got to deal with that with every once in a while, but we're all going to make mistakes. Look, the only perfect person who ever walked this earth, we nailed to a cross 2,000 years ago. Okay. We're all going to make mistakes. Nobody's perfect. I had a boss who said, Oak, if you didn't make a mistake today, you probably didn't do anything. You know, and my philosophy has always been this, you know, if you make a mistake, okay. I don't care if you made a mistake. What did you do after you made the mistake? Do you try to blame somebody else? Do you sweep it under the rug? Or do you walk up to me and say, hey, boss, I messed up and this is how we're going to fix it? I say, okay, let's go fix it.
Good.
Let's learn from it so we don't make that mistake again. But let's go fix it and let's move on. We're all going to make mistakes. Sorry. That's just the fact of life.
And we have these different spheres of legacy. Where are you leaving your legacy? In your community, with your family, biologically, but this whole spiritually, like you said, your faith, your values, your morals. But as a leader, you're touching all those aspects of people when they go home after the 8 to 5 or 9 to 5.
Right.
And so as a leader, investing in them, I love Helen Keller. She says, I will not just live my life. I will not just spend my life. I will invest my life. We invest in the stock market. We invest in our 401ks. And that takes work to go study our followers and to go invest in them. And sometimes as a leader, we don't make the time to do that. You talked about making your own cup of coffee.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Well, I'm a firm believer that you got to get to know the people that you have the privilege to lead. One, because how do you know where they want to go if you don't get to know them? You know, that should be a question you ask. What is your goal in life? What's your goal in the company? What's your goal in life? And then as a leader, you should be trying to help that person meet that. And even if that means they're going to leave in a couple of years and move on to something else, you should feel good about that. You shouldn't hold that against somebody if they're leaving your organization to go do something better. So you should look at that as a success as a leader. But I had a boss who said, Oak, he was one of those believed in getting to know people as well. And he said, never, ever, ever turn down a chance to go get your own cup of coffee. I don't care how high up in the organization you get. And he said, and this is why. He said, number one, you build trust. You show everybody that you're no better than they are. You got to go get your own cup of coffee just like they do. And number two, he said, if you're lucky, you got 2 or 3 different ways to get from your office to the coffee pot and back. And along the way, you stop and talk to people. Because I'm huge on getting to know people, and I tried to pass that on to every leader that I help commission. And as I go around and talk now to anybody I can talk to, I tell them, you got to get to know people. And I said, and it's easy. It really is easy. Now, there's a couple easy ways to do it. Number one, get out from behind your desk. Nobody wants to follow
Amen.
somebody who's sitting behind their desk all day. Now I got it. Leaders got to sit behind their computer every once in a while because there's things you got to do. But every opportunity you get out from behind your desk and go out there where the people you're leading are and do things with them and ask them questions. Because I promise you, you go out where that person's working, you call that person in and ask them a question in your office, you will get an entirely different answer
Absolutely.
if you ask it where they're working. Entirely different, I promise. So get out there and ask them questions where they're working, not where you're working. Number two, I tell everybody, go out. Your job as a leader, your goal as a leader should be able to go out and find one person every day in your organization, one new person every day, and find out one new thing about that person. Not about the job, not about their work. Find out what their spouse's name are, what their kids' names are. What sports do their kids play? What's their hobbies? What's their likes, don't like? What are they good at? What are they not so good at? That allows you to then, when you're assigning projects, you know people. And you might know that, hey, this project really needs this in it, and that guy's not any good at it. This person sitting next to the lady sitting next to him is really good at that. So I'll assign this project to them. You won't know that unless you get to know people. So I'm just a huge believer that you got to take every opportunity to get to know people.
I have one thing I'll do, because as a leader, you've got PowerPoint, right? You've got a strategy, you've got to give an update to your leaders. And one of the things I've forced myself to do, because I'd rather be in my office working. It's not built in me to be social and be an extrovert. So that's one of those things you have to sometimes develop.
You do.
Leader. But one thing I've forced myself to do is a PowerPoint road trip. And what I mean by that is I will be working on my PowerPoint for my supervisors, and I'll go walk and get my cup of coffee, but I'll go sit down in someone else's office and say, look at this chart here. What do you think of this?
Yeah.
And like you said, they will have a much more honest and robust discussion because you're in their office.
That's
You're
right.
asking for their opinion. And so there's power in getting that cup of coffee, getting to know them. And you could start off before the PowerPoint road trip with asking how their kid's soccer game was. So
Absolutely.
forcing yourself to do that as a leader is a really productive thing. It may be a hard thing, but it's
It is.
productive.
Well, I one of the things that I absolutely believe is nothing that we have to do as a leader is hard. Doing it is hard sometimes, but what we have to do is not hard. The things you have to do to be a good leader are not hard, believe me, or I wouldn't be doing them, but actually forcing yourself to do them sometimes is hard. And sometimes it's because, like you said, maybe it just isn't in your personality to do that kind of a thing. But you got to force yourself to do that. You got to have that self-discipline and that personal courage to go out there and do those things. And it gets easier.
Yes.
You get better at it.
Yes.
It's a skill just like any other skill. Just like riding a bike. None of us ever got on the bike the first time and never fell off. Okay.
Right.
We all did. I still have scars from where I fell off as a kid.
And Oak, is people are watching. And so they're watching what you did after the terminations, after you fired people. They're wanting to be addressed. They're wanting to know. And sometimes you can communicate things as to the why, and sometimes you
Right.
can't.
Right.
But that's part of authentic and servant leadership is being willing to share information. And so they're watching to see what you're going to tell them. They're watching, and I can guarantee you, after I went to someone's office and sat down, there were 5 people that asked, "What was he doing in your
Yeah.
office?" And
Yeah.
so first, there's the jealousy factor. Get ready, because if you bopped into their office, you better bop into someone else's office.
Right.
But then they're finding out that, wow, he asked for their input, and so people are watching, and so it's
All
a
the time.
great
All
opportunity
the
to
time. And
duplicate.
if
They'll
you
hold you
don't think they
accountable.
are, you're pretty naive.
That's and that's another thing is I've asked my team to hold me accountable doing 360s and 360 assessments and asking for their inputs. And then I will share with them my weakness Now you got to be careful with that one too. But there are times and places to share what you're working on as a leader and to have them help hold you accountable.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, as a lead, you owe it to the people that you're leading to be the best leader you can be. You owe them that. That is your responsibility as a leader, is to be the best leader you can be for the people you have the privilege to lead. And the only way you're going to do that is to figure out where your weaknesses are and come up with a plan, a professional development plan that's going to help you develop strengthen those places you're weak. And you should be doing that same thing for everybody who works for you, not just the leaders who work for you, everybody. And, you know, I've been, when I say that, sometimes somebody will say, well, why would I invest in somebody who's brand new to my organization? I said, because you never know. That person may someday have your job.
Yes.
And even if they don't, let's say they never become a leader whatsoever of any type, every little bit that you do to make that person better is going to make your organization better. And here's the other piece of that. If you don't have a professional development program for everybody, let's say I come to work for you, Doug, and I have aspirations. I'm brand new in the organization. I have aspirations to be a leader. If I don't see a pathway for me to get there through training, through professional development, I'm leaving and I'm going somewhere that does. So you may lose your best people because you didn't take the time to come up with a professional development program.
Yeah. And guess what is I had the luxury of having an amazing leader who headed up a learning and talent team for me. Most organizations don't have that, but find some people in your organization that have that passion bent,
And there are lots of people
experience,
that do.
and sanction, anoint them, ask them to help you lead. Find your areas of weakness, but learning and talent and development is what, especially the Gen Zers, is they're finding my leader didn't invest in me. 75% of Gen Zers and millennials are job hoppers
Yeah.
by their own admittance. But you gave some advice. You hand out a little card, and it's called Advice for Young Leaders. I asked you to send that to me, and I'm going to put it up here in the PowerPoint when we're done because I love PowerPoint. But here's the advice you give young leaders. Number one, set the example in everything you do, day in and day out. You, as the young leader, or even as the follower, set the example. People are
That's right.
watching you too. Number two, take care of your people. They're your most important asset. Make that not a head knowledge thing, but put it into action. Be not just a hearer, but a doer in that. Be in charge, own everything in your organization. Means admitting your mistakes, admitting when you were wrong, own it, back up your people. Don't take all the credit, give some credit. Lead by walking around, not from behind a desk. I love that one. Make your own cup of coffee. Be decisive, take risks, stand by your decisions, even if they're wrong afterwards. Admit it. Okay, I didn't have all the information. I made most leaders, well, I don't know if it's most, I don't have the research, but there's paralysis of decision making, right? They have the data, but they want more data and they keep punting. And so, one of the things, I think George W. Bush wrote the book called Decision Points.
Yeah, he did.
Being willing to make those decisions, right?
That's your job.
Yeah.
And when I find somebody, a leader who keeps pushing things down the road, and I ask them why, and they say, well, I didn't have enough information. Well, I'm here to tell you that place where you have all the information that you need or you want, that place is called fantasy land. That place doesn't exist.
Right. Yeah. So that's a good one of my favorites. And
Yeah,
develop the culture of your organization. My last two roles, that is something very hard to do if your culture's in transition.
it
You
is.
have to surround yourself and have a coalition of advocates, of thought leaders, of indirect leaders, indirect followers, and build that culture. Don't try and do it on yourself with changing a culture, change
No,
management.
you
That's
can't.
yeah.
You can't. You got to get everybody involved, and it's got to be something that you make a conscious decision to do. Figure out where you really want, who you want to be. I always talk about vision, plan, and culture, and they're all tied completely together. And if they're not, then you're in trouble. You know, because the vision is where you want to be 5 years from now, 10 years from now, whatever amount of time you want to go out. The plan is how you're going to get there. And then the culture is who you are along that journey from here to there. And so that is huge. And you got to really think about what it is you want your organization to stand for.
Yeah. And changing a culture is going to take longer than changing a vision, setting your goals.
Yeah.
That has been ingrained sometimes for generations. So
Absolutely.
that's a great one. 7, train and trust your people. Resist the urge to micromanage. Number 8, don't be afraid to make necessary changes. Number 9, continue to improve communication skills. That's an amazing piece of advice for leaders. And number 10, never underestimate the power of a handwritten note. And even an email or a text, but the power of a handwritten note. Wow, those are 10 good pieces of advice, and we'll post that. So your book, Your Leadership Legacy, Becoming the Leader You Were Meant to Be and Being a Multi-Generational Leader. 183 pages, very readable. The quotes themselves from business and military leaders are worth the price of admission here. And not just the quotes, but you kind of do a mini bio on some of the quoters. That's great.
I tried to do that, and I really did. You know, those are some of my favorite quotes. I've collected quotes probably all my life, and I just didn't want to throw quotes in there. I wanted to make sure that the quote I used in the section that I used it in tied it together to really pertain to what I was trying to talk about. So I really put a lot of thought in what quotes I was going to put in that book.
And some of you will buy the book just because there's no theory and no academia. Okay. You can go watch my leadership course online and get that. You don't need that here. You're going to get practical takeaways and go-dos immediately. And yes, in my course, I have 35 years of corporate aerospace and defense experience. So you get that too, but there's my little advertisement. But the other thing I'm going to do, Lieutenant Colonel, is, and I don't know if was God nudging me or just a crazy idea, but anybody who buys your book and sends me an email that they bought it, I'm going to send them a free copy of my book. I wrote a book called A Lasting Legacy, and it's not so much on leadership. It's about family, faith, and finances. I'm going to send them a free copy of my book for anybody who buys your book, either at your conferences or as a result of this podcast. From here on out until I run out of books, that's going to be my
gift. Very
gift.
nice. That's very nice of you,
sir, with how you've invested in people. And so one last thing before we run into the rapid fire round is, what's the one most important piece of advice you would give to a leader?
Yeah, get to know your people. That is absolutely, to me, the number one thing. And I'm seeing less and less of it, unfortunately.
Yeah.
You know, and I got it. I mean, things get hectic, but again, if you do this right, if you empower people, that gives you time to do the things that you need to do as a leader. Not only the vision and the plan, all that big sky stuff, but then also to do some stuff internally as well by going down and getting to know people. Trust the people, get to know the people that you have the privilege to lead, and then trust them and empower them to do their job so you can do your job.
And the long lost art of delegation will come out of that.
It will.
That was one of the things I struggled with as a leader, a young leader, was being willing to delegate, because I could always get the job done quicker, better, cheaper. But it turns out that you're really shooting yourself in the foot because you don't have time to do everything that you need.
That's right.
All right, rapid fire. You ready? You need to stretch?
I'm ready.
Okay. All right. 5 seconds is your limit. If you don't answer, we're moving on. Okay.
Okay.
Cake or pie?
Pie.
Sweet or salty?
Salty every day.
Amen. Kindle or paperback?
Paperback.
Cats or dogs?
Cats.
Text or talk?
Talk.
No, it's handwritten note.
Yeah. But
Cautious or bold?
bold.
What is your bedtime and what is your rise time?
Bedtime's between 9 and 10, and I get up every morning no later than 5 o'clock.
Ooh, ouch. What's your pet peeve?
Wow. People not on time.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite Bible verse?
Oh, wow. I can't name the Bible verse, but it's the armor of God.
Okay.
Ephesians.
Ephesians 6.
Ephesians. Yeah.
All right. Favorite book or favorite author?
Favorite book, probably John Wooden on leadership.
Oh, good one. Best family memory?
Trip to um trip to New Zealand, probably.
It's a good one. Do you have a favorite sports team?
I grew up in Northern Illinois, Chicago Cubs.
All right, Cubby's got one finally. If you could switch lives with one person for 24 hours, who would that be?
Elon Musk.
Oh, yeah, that would be mine too. Favorite band or song?
Um, Eric Clapton's You Look Wonderful Tonight.
Oh, that's a good one. What brings you the most joy?
The three F's that I have in my life: family, faith, and fishing.
It's good. What brings you the most meaning? Same three or
My
anything else?
grandkids, my
Grandkids.
kids and my grandkids.
10-hour drive. What are you doing?
My wife and I listen to audiobooks.
Okay. Let's see. Three things you bring knowing you'll be stuck on a desert island for a year.
My wife, my Bible, and uh,
The MREs.
yeah, yeah, that'd be nice. Something to eat.
Something to eat. Best compliment you've ever received.
The young lady who said she wanted to run the ROTC program just like I did.
That's great. Most adventurous thing you've ever done.
Uh, climbed Ayers Rock.
Favorite meal?
Steak,
Yes. Medium?
medium rare.
Okay. One sentence recommendation on being a better leader.
Um, take care of the people you have the privilege to lead.
Last one prayer request.
Um, world peace.
Okay, that's a big one. It might take longer than a cultural change.
Yeah.
All right, so folks, get that copy of your leadership legacy and then send me a note and get your free copy. I will put Lieutenant Colonel Oak's contact information, his LinkedIn, and where you can get him to speak. You will not regret it. Sir, I thank you. We salute you and appreciate the time.
Oh, this has been fantastic, Doug. I loved it.
Thank you, sir.
Have a good day.
Bye-bye.